You're listening to the Monday Night Community Show with Daniel on BRFM.
This is the Daniel Monday Night Community Show on demand through YouTube. Thank you very much for choosing to listen to us through this method. If you'd like to keep up to date with when I add new interviews, then subscribe to this channel. And we're now joined live in the studio with our regular visitor, Dave Hale. Dave, as always, it's great to have you along this evening.
And likewise, it's delightful to be back, actually. And given the fact that the last couple of days we've had better weather, 2 days running, some sunshine on Sheppey. Quite a record, I think, for this year so far. I don't know what you feel about that.
No, it's been quite nice. All the daffodils and crocuses out on these nice sunny, sort of wintry, sunny days.
All these early spring flowers have suddenly started, it's time to actually show off, in effect, and I think we're all the better for that, seeing that, actually. But it's delightful to be here again.
Well, before we cover our subjects, I was just wondering if you could just give us a little refresher on the Sheppey Horticultural Society.
Well, the Society's been running for over 50 years, so it's well established as a group on Sheppey. And as I've said before, we run 2 sites on the island. One's at Richmond Street and Nursery Close, where there's about 97 plots, I think it is, various sizes, up to 10 rods or so. That's about 75 feet long by about 25-30 feet wide. On the other side, that's at Medway Road. It's situated, as we all know, on the other side of Sheerness, where there are approximately 60-plus members looking after a plot. There probably are more now, actually. At Medway Road, there's plots available, so we would actively encourage those interested in allotmenteering or plotting to take up a plot there. And we're currently full at Richmond Street, which is a double-edged sword. You'd like to be able to accommodate more people at Richmond, but it's only a finite size, and what we do, if somebody gives up a full-size plot, a 10-rod plot, then we will cut it into 2 and try to accommodate 2 sets of people. What I think is pleasing, though, is that there's been, over the last few years, a sustained rise in the number of people and families, young families, taking interest in growing their own produce. As we said before in the previous times that I've been with you, food is becoming more expensive. And it's delightful to know that people want to grow their own food, knowing full well they know what's actually in it, and the amount of effort that they put into it, they get out of it as well. So that's gratifying. Society offers members use of tools, machinery to help cultivate the plots, and there are shops on both sites. Selling at advantageous prices. For instance, we've just got quite a tonnage of potatoes, which we sell at about 2/3 the price that you can buy them commercially. That's for our members. But I tell you what, it ain't half a job actually bagging up 3 kilos and 6 kilos of potatoes for the members. But that's who we are, and that's where we are, and we've been going for quite some time.
And Dave, are there any plants you can be planting at this time of year?
It's been something of an understatement to say, but I think you would agree with me this year so far. Everybody has said the same thing. When is this weather going to break? And hopefully, finally, it has actually broken. It's all for the better. But it's been a very difficult year to get on in the garden, all the allotment come to that. It's been so bad, the weather has been for so long that it seems there won't be enough time to get it all in, and that we'll be hurrying to catch up when the weather finally does break, as it seems to have done now, for the better. I think actually what gardening teaches you is nothing else, is patience, to allow the weather to sort of take part. But there are plenty of colourful plants that can be brought from garden centres and nurseries. I was at one a couple of days ago, actually, and it was just an absolute riot of colour. Bare-rooted bushes and trees can also be planted if, of course, you can get onto the ground, and there's no danger of it being very muddy, if you understand what I mean. But don't forget that new plantings will still need to be watered in for a period, despite the fact that the ground may very well be quite boggy and soggy. You'll still need to water them in if you put bare-rooted plants in. Many varieties, spring bulbs, as I've mentioned, narcissus, tulips, anemones, hyacinths, and there's one which has suddenly become quite favourable. It's quite a small flower, muscari. It's an intense blue, so if you can buy quite a few of the plants and plant them in a swathe, they will reward you with an intense colour. Muscari, Muscari. There's another one which I personally favour because it looks like snowdrops. For some reason, my garden won't take snowdrops. But leucojum, which looks like a very tall snowdrop, it has the same flower formation. And of course fritillaries, which are just starting to come through. The snakehead fritillary, that's starting to come through as well. So if you're buying, or if you've saved potted spring bulbs from last year, it might be useful just to dig the pot into the ground with the plant still in it, and that's something I favour doing. There are lots of daffodils around at the moment. Good idea is not to actually take them out of the pot, but to put the pot into the ground. They will grow on, they will take some of the nutrient from the ground surrounding it. When they die back, of course, lift the pot. You still have the bulbs, put them into a safe place elsewhere and replant with something else a bit later in the season. So in effect, you've got an instant, more natural looking garden rather than having lots and lots and lots of different coloured pots around, and plastic pots can look pretty obtrusive, I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah.
So it's more instant, it's more natural looking. On the vegetable side, there are seeds that should be going in now or over the next week or so. I've mentioned potatoes already. Early season potatoes will start to need chitting, for instance. They're traditionally sown towards the end of this month, so you'll need to start them off by the chitting, i.e. little shoots coming out of the top of the potato. Most seedlings will be benefit from being protected for a little while longer, so in effect we're a little bit early, not quite on the cusp, but we're a little bit early for actually planting other things, so towards the end of the month. So yes, there are lots of things that you can actually plant around. There's a lot of instant garden around at this particular moment, as I've already mentioned, which will give you that colour that we've all been asking for and been begging for.
And I was wondering if you are planning to go out and do some gardening over the next couple of weeks or at the weekend, what kind of things can you be getting on with?
Again, it's a huge question, depending on the weather, obviously. But now with that expectation, the expectation of warmer, more settled weather that the weatherman's been telling us about, certainly for the next week, I hope. The weather coming on, it's time for all those jobs that have been put off until now. Simply because you've not been able to get out into the garden, or you've not been able to walk on the garden. Some off my particular list. And top of the list comes weeding. The blighters never seem to stop growing, seemingly putting on the faster growth than your plants can actually keep up with, so don't let them gain a stranglehold. Before it becomes literally a major job of clearing them out. Weeds will grow fast, very fast indeed. They'll take advantage of the fact that you've not been pulling them out. Mulching around plants, and that also helps to keep down the weeds, and funnily enough to help keep in the moisture when the ground does actually become drier. Clearing, digging out from the compost bins, using the compost that's been made, i.e. we're talking about, it's back to the mulching again, and using it as a feed, and helping again to suppress the weeds that are growing. They're growing at a pace. In fact, funnily enough, I was out in the garden this afternoon with my wife, and we were just picking weed after weed after weed, and it just shows you how they will grow very, very quickly. Potting up, repotting with fresh composts, those plants that have been overwintered. I'm particularly thinking of overwintering fuchsias, which are now just starting to break their leaves out. So they will need repotting and looking out. Checking the root ball of potted plants for evidence of pests such as aphid. Believe it or not, I've actually seen aphid on a couple of my plants. In the greenhouse, would you believe?
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed today actually there was some green fronds and roses and things like that.
That's right, yeah, they are chancers, and then they're quick to take advantage of the rising sap in the plants. Vine weevil grubs is another one as well. Have a look at the soil which is in the pots, those plants which have been overwintered, vine weevil grubs. You'll notice them, they look like a little white comma. They're about 1/4 inch long. Have no compunction, destroy them, certainly. And if you actually see the adult, which is a little black 1/2 inch beetle with tiny, tiny little orange dots on it, again, with a protruding snout, it's a weevil. Get rid of it, because it's looking for your potted plants to lay its eggs in amongst the roots. The larvae will destroy the root. First you get to know about it is when the plant literally topples over, dead. You have no idea that they will have been in there for quite some time.
I was going to say, actually, quickly, we've got some lilies just about coming through.
Right.
And I'm sure there was like little red, sort of, not ladybirds, but almost like sort of a beetle. I'm sure that is a lily beetle, isn't it? That's already.
Little, it's about half an inch long.
Yeah.
With a thin body, black underneath.
And red on top.
And red on top. That sounds very much like lily beetle. Again, have no compunction about killing them, because they and their larvae will literally destroy your lilies as you are virtually looking at them. So there's no rhyme or reason to actually have them. One trick of actually catching them is don't try to take them from the top, but use both your hands, put a hand underneath, and then go in at the top, because what they will tend to do is drop off, not knowing that there is another hand below, whether you're left or right-handed. So that's one way of actually catching them. But always look underneath the leaf as well, because that's where they tend to lay the eggs. The larvae have something of a nasty habit of eating and then covering themselves with the detritus that they've just actually eaten, so that they look like a bird dropping. Camouflage is brilliant, it really is, but you've got to be aware that they are actually under the leaf as much. So that's probably the lily beetle that seems to become a later day scourge, actually. So be aware, because lilies are just starting to come through and they're looking for those fresh leaves. So the other big thing, of course, is slugs and snails are starting to wake up as well. They've been hiding for all these months, so just be aware. Go on a slug hunt or a snail hunt. However people dispose of them is entirely up to them, but just to be aware, slugs and snails are starting to wake up and they're starting to be around. Slugs are a little bit more than snails. Prune back established plants where necessary. Funnily enough, I was pruning an apple tree this afternoon with my wife. We tend to differ on how much to take back, but that's another story altogether.
I wouldn't have thought you could prune an apple tree, because I'd be worried about if you pruned it and then the frost got into where you just cut, if you had any sort of cold weather.
We tend to paint the edges a little bit, but it's where you get ingrowing branches and crossing branches, where the wind could actually rub a branch against a branch, and that will introduce more disease and more pests into the plant. So it's worth actually doing around now. I suppose cutting out the diseased and crossing branches, pruning inward pointing branches, that kind of thing, so that you've got an open structure and the light and the air can actually get in, thus tending to negate the viruses and the bacteria and what have you, all of those nasties that you tend to get where a plant has become overcrowded within itself, within its own space, if you understand what I mean. I suppose the last thing I would want to say is take a day out to see what new varieties are on the market. Go visit, go have a look, see what's available. Because you never know, there might be something that takes your fancy, that fits a particular spot that you might have, which of course is another pointer. Always read the label, because the advice is usually good advice, i.e. this needs a sunny spot, this needs a dry sunny spot, this can go into a sheltered, shaded spot. Never try to put a plant which will automatically struggle in the wrong area. So be aware of the plant's needs, and it will reward you. So lots to be doing over the next week or so. I'm sorry if the list is that's about half the list of getting on, but as you say, you're able to get out into the garden now, so that list will be quite long. But just mark off the points as we go along.
We're talking to Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society, and Dave, I was wondering if we could look a little bit ahead now and perhaps look at what you can be doing in the garden and allotment over the next couple of months.
Well, given that we've already said there's a period of catch-up going on at this particular moment, literally, I would think I would wait until the back end of March, early April, sometimes even early May, to plant a lot of the seeds which will need to go in. Unless, of course, you've got conditions like a heated greenhouse, those kinds of conditions where you can put them in a little earlier. But things like tomatoes, runner beans, French beans, much more tender than you would expect them to be. They can be sown also directly into a warm soil even in as late as June, late May, June. So, in effect, there is a catch-up period, but this magic word that gardeners use called patience, in fact. If in doubt, I think wait until the weather and the soil warms up. But one of the things, obviously you can continue weeding, because what you've missed the first time around, or what comes up after you've missed it the first time around, they will always seem to grow fast, and they will always come up in April, May. So keep a careful watch, I think, on what's growing well, and those plants that might need a bit of help as the weather warms up. So sometimes you can reach an early heat wave level, in effect, that will help, won't help a plant that's getting used to the atmospheric conditions. Plant out those tender plants that have been growing in the cold frame or the greenhouse. Make sure they've been hardened off, first of all, and acclimatised to outside conditions. And I know this sounds time-consuming and labour-intensive, but it's a case of actually, if you've got a good day, put them out. But don't forget, of course, that the temperature could drop radically overnight or towards the evening, so make sure that they are well looked after through the night. No plant likes a hot or a warm day to be followed by a cold, possibly even a frosty night. We still have to be aware of that, of course. In the vegetable garden, as I've said, late April, May, June, so runner beans, French beans in their final positions. Plant out tomatoes. And I know we're looking a little bit, couple of months ahead, but it is towards the end of that couple of months that you're looking at vegetables like tomatoes, squashes, courgettes, marrows, putting them in their final positions after having perhaps grown them in the greenhouse. Protect any fruit bushes from the marauding birds. Very important. They want feeding throughout 365 days of the year. So if you've been attracting birds into your garden over the winter, they will still come to your garden when your fruit is starting to come on the bushes. And obviously keep a watch out for the marauding birds, and keep a careful watch for those other perennial pests. For instance, you mentioned one this evening, aphid, which will be growing like topsy, I would imagine, so be very aware of aphid. Hopefully we'll get a good glut of ladybirds this year. I've actually seen ladybirds already. I've uncovered goodness knows how many. And they're a little bit sleepy at this particular moment. I must admit, this sounds strange, but it's almost like you're saying to them, come on, get a move on. There's food about for you. Encourage pollinating insects by planting suitable flowers in and around the vegetable garden. Bees will want food. Have you probably noticed a number of bumblebees that are already in flight?
Yeah.
And they're obviously looking for things for nectar and pollen to take back to their nests. Bumblebees will do an awful lot of good. I know everybody talks about honeybees, but bumblebees are just as important. I've even seen, would you believe, a dragonfly in the last week. Now that is quite incredible, I think.
Oh yeah, especially this early on.
Yeah. So, as I say, keep feeding the birds. They'll still want to be. They'll still want to be fed because they will have young as well. So you can't suddenly stop doing it. And relax. I know that sounds obvious, but relax in your garden and enjoy the fruits of the fruits of your labour that you've already put in for the last couple of months. So that's what the next couple of months has got for so many gardens. You can't afford to ignore those kinds of jobs, which will suddenly catch up with you come end of May, early June.
Dave, I was wondering next, do you have any useful tips for the time of year? And also, we've kind of mentioned, well, I was hoping we could cover it in a bit more details about the waterlogging, because there's certainly a lot of water about, although it's been a bit dry recently. Yeah,
the island has been luckier than most areas, obviously. We're talking about Somerset Levels and places like that, although there has been some flooding in Kent. But I think the island has got away with it to a certain extent. Other people might beg to differ where that's concerned, but certainly in my own garden it's not too bad at all. Very, very muddy. So having said that, one of the first things, if you're managing to get out into the garden, and you're going to be using electrical tools, for instance, hedge cutting. I'm not suggesting electric lawn mowing at the moment. It's a little bit too premature, perhaps, for that. Although I have actually heard the sound of lawn mowers, would you believe? So make sure you use a circuit breaker if you're using electrical machinery in the garden. It's still very damp out there, as you will appreciate, and I hope a lot of people will appreciate, I'm not a health and safety expert, but I use a circuit breaker all the time. I'm actually in the garden. It is just so much safer to be able to use one of those. If, for instance, another tip, if you've got ornamental grasses in your garden, leave them alone, as they'll still give your garden shape over the winter months or over the early spring months. They'll also feed small birds with the seed heads, and you can cut them back later in the spring when the new growth starts appearing. They'll also use it for nesting material as well. Seed heads and nesting material, very important. In fact, funnily enough, I took a blackbird nest out of the hedge, an ivy hedge, a couple of days ago on the side of the garden, and believe it or not, half of it's disappeared already. So the birds are looking for nesting material. I know that because I saw the blackbird with it in his mouth. It's probably his nest from last year, but there you go. Insulating the ground, flower beds, that's one way of protecting valuable plants during these particular months. Cover the beds with straw or leaf mulch to keep any frost off. Sure as eggs is eggs, we will get a cold snap. It can't be all halcyon days from now on. We're going to get a cold snap, I am sure of it. And if you can't move the plant and it's too heavy, lift the pot off the ground a little over winter to allow air to circulate underneath it. Again, if we do get a cold snap, water can get underneath it and doesn't help a pot. So certainly there's 3 tips, but I think the most important one is using a circuit breaker, because it is still very wet and very damp out there, and it's just a simple safety measure, and they don't cost that much money. But I think you said you wanted to talk about waterlogging. Yeah,
I thought we'd cover that, because there's certainly been a lot of water laying about, I think.
Despite the fact we've got away with it so far. Waterlogged ground, I would suggest, seriously, I would suggest keep off it, certainly for a little while yet. It seems to be drying out. Certainly it's drying out on the allotment. But I dug a fork load about a week or so ago. The top 1/4 inch where the wind had got at it was perfectly dry. It was almost crusty, would you believe, but underneath it's still sopping wet, still sodden. So there is still this, if you're walking on it, it's still this risk of compacting the soil even further, which doesn't help, not least because you're going to have to dig it up at some time anyway, which will make it all the harder for doing. So if you can, keep off it. But if you have to tread on waterlogged soil, try to spread the load as much as possible. What I mean by that is actually putting down a board and working off that, because you're spreading the load across the ground, and you'll find that you won't compact it as much. Another thing is extended periods of rain. Well, we were talking about this before we came on air this evening. Extended periods of rain can also wash out much of the nutrient that's naturally in the soil, or that you may have put into the soil or dug in over the autumn period. So, and it might not be there. So replenish and feed with new fertilizer, compost, mulch, whatever you want to use to fertilize the ground. So you'd be surprised how much leaches out when we've had an exceptional amount of rain like we have had this year. That can wash out the nutrient. If your plants are in pots, I've just mentioned, raise them off the ground to allow drainage through the bottom. Particularly if the if the pot isn't terracotta. A lot of people use large plastic pots these days. Nothing wrong with that at all. But the water isn't able to get out, and you could have a waterlogged plant. And if we get a cold, icy snap of weather, any excess moisture could turn to ice. It could expand and eventually break the pot. And as we know, pots are not cheap these days. Certainly not some of the pots. The ornamental pots, which have ornamental trees like bay and all those, got laurel and what have you in them. In itself, it's an expensive exercise replacing the container. We all know that. You suddenly come out of the morning and thought, how the heck did that break? Well, it's a good process that's been going on over some period of time. And it could also possibly rot the roots or drown what might be a prized favourite or even very expensive plant. So if you can, to recap, keep off it as much as possible. If you do have to walk on it, spread a board around on it to lighten the load. Raised pots, certainly terracotta ones, which could break if we get a cold snap. And make sure that there's water is able to sort of get out from underneath the bottom.
talking to Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society this evening. Of course, Sheppey Horticultural Society, as well as being a regular guest here at the Monday Night Community Show, they're taking part in Arts Transmission. They're one of 3 local groups taking part in the project, which is the project to make new sound art for the airwaves here at BRFM, and I'm covering the process of the project by working with the groups and the local artists. We're doing a selection of interviews, and then it end up on pieces of artwork being played sound art here at the Monday Night Community Show. And Dave was hoping we could talk a little bit about the part of the project that you're taking part in.
Yeah, by all means. It's a new departure for us, and as I said to you earlier this evening when we were talking about the project itself, at first we were slightly nonplussed about being approached. We're delighted that you've approached us. It's great to be one of the 3, but as I say, we were slightly nonplussed about being approached to take part, because allotmenteering can be on occasion something of a quietish pastime sometimes, and you've experienced this yourself, where that it's very, very quiet, and there's only the buzz or the sound of what's occurring naturally, which of course is what this is about sometimes, actually, the quietness and the natural sound which comes out of allotmenteering or gardening generally. But we're very pleased that we're part of the project, as I said, and very pleased in our chosen artist, Kate Chapman. We have someone, I think, who's in tune, and I apologise for they all come out, these very poor jokes, actually. So she's in tune with the allotmenteering ethos. She tells us, and when we met her a couple of weeks ago, if you remember, when she couldn't wait to tell us that she was also she had newly taken up an allotment herself, so she knows something about what allotmenteering is actually about.
To hear.
It was, but the other members of that particular party were also allotmenteers. Allotmenteers were coming out of the woodwork, I think, on that particular morning, which was gratifying because they're aware of what allotmenteering or plot holding is actually about. So, as I say, she's someone who's in tune with the allotmenteering ethos, and she's taken up a plot, I believe, in Nottingham, which is her hometown, as I understand it. So, it will be a very interesting and hopefully, and I apologise for this word because I couldn't think of anything, a very fruitful exercise. Sorry, Daniel, you're smiling, you're chuckling silently, I hope. To hear what the finished recording, or natural sounds in effect, and the interviews of an allotment, what they actually sound like, postcards from the plot, I think is a very, very appropriate title for what she seems to want to do from the CV that she actually put together, which saying she wants to take natural sounds as well as interviews, conversations which are heard, conversations which are passed by. You know this kind of thing where you don't hear the beginning, you hear the middle, but you don't hear the ending.
Yeah.
Those kinds of things, the natural sounds. And I think hopefully they were taken with both our sites, because they are different. The allotmenteers on both sites are different people, and it'll be nice to come together as a society. It's something that the whole society is actually putting together with the good auspices of Kate Chapman, our chosen artist.
Well, Dave, I was wondering next, and this is something I know you always like to cover, and I think it's good to cover, and that's how much an allotment plot costs to rent for the year. Total for a 10-rod plot, and we've kept our prices exactly the same as they have been for the last couple of years. The total subscription for a 10-rod allotment will cost you the grand total of £41.50. So you can imagine that's about 80p a day. Or 80p a week, sorry, my apologies, 80p a day. 80p a week. All these years I've been talking about £41.50, and I get that one wrong. 80p a week. Ground rent for a 10-rod, £25. Water rate, and water, as we know, is expensive. And going back to what we were talking about, tips for tips for the garden, water butts. We've had an awful lot of water, and we've had an awful lot of rain. It is still worth collecting it, simply because water rate's going up like crazy, as we all know, and we need to be careful about water, not least in the garden and on allotments. So the water rate is £15, and a society subscription will cost you £1.50. That gives the grand total of £41.50. And for a 5-rod allotment, ground rent £12.50, water rate £7.50 because you're only watering half of it, and society subscription still £1.50.
And you don't have to be an allotment holder to be a member of the society. Membership means that you're able to use our shops, and you've seen our shops, how quite well stocked at this time of the year they actually are. And you can also enter our 2-day annual and autumn summer show. So £41.50 in total for a 10-rod, £21.50 for a 5-rod, which is what we tried to get people to take up initially, to make sure that to see whether they like it or not, and it's not too onerous to actually dig a 5-rod plot. You'd be surprised how much that will actually give you. You've seen them yourself.
Yep.
And that's what it'll cost you.
Dave, what would you recommend to someone who is interested in becoming a member of the society and perhaps going on to rent their own allotment plot as well?
I think the recommendation doesn't change from the time that you asked me this question. I think the most important thing is again, to discuss the plans of what you want to do with your family. Involve the family from the start. Read up on the subject. There are any number of books out there. The bookshelves have sort of burgeoned and are now pretty weighty, whereas there used to be 1 or 2 books perhaps on allotmenteering. Now there are any number of books which are coming out and being published. Read up on the subject, numbers of books, magazine articles, news features, websites. They're now available to research. Be committed, but work at your own pace, and I think that's very important as well. It was the first piece of advice I was actually given. Work at your own pace. Decide on your targets, such as what you really want to grow and how much time you can actually devote, both to a garden as well as an allotment. Allotment may be slightly more important, but simply because you're growing more vegetables in it, if you understand. While it's not all hard graft, there is some work to do. Probably a bit more this year, simply because the ground has become so compacted with the amount of rain that we've actually got. I think above all, enjoy the experience and take pride in what you've actually grown. It may be the most misshapen bean, tomato, whatever, but it's what you've grown. Be proud of what you're actually growing. Gardening and allotmenteering is its own free fitness program, and there's always time to switch off for a while, as you've experienced yourself when you've come down to see us. Being able to actually sit in the middle of Sheerness and cool off, chill out, whatever you want to call it, and just take a time to actually look around, watch the bees, watch the flowers, watch the birds. So be just in your own world. You can do that even in Sheerness, and I've done it on occasions. My wife has actually phoned me on the mobile phone, and I've woken up with a start thinking, crikey, I've been asleep for an hour or so. Wonderful in Sheerness. It's its own free fitness program, as I say, and you can contact the society by getting in touch or telephoning our secretary, Mrs. Sue Underhill. And okay to give a number? I say that I ask this every
definitely.
time. 01795 661 547. That's 01795, of course, 661 547. Or, even better still, when the weather finally brightens up, or it becomes consistently bright, let's say, pay us a visit one Sunday morning when the shops are open. Sunday tends to be more social day, where people tend to gather, chew the fat, talk about things, talk about gardening, and buy their seeds and products and what have you. So Sunday is a good time to actually come see us, come visit. There's absolutely no let or hindrance about walking around and putting your name down for an allotment. So that's, but the first port of call, I think, is Sue Underhill on 01795 661 547, or pay a visit to Sheppey Horticultural Society's newly got up website, which is www.sheppeyhorticulturalsociety.co.uk.
Dave, as always, it's great to have you along with us here at the Monday Night Community Show. Once again, thank you very much for coming along.
Thanks for having us. It's always a delight to actually come up. One of these days we will have sunshine coming through your recording studio window. It always seems to be dark, and the wind's got up again, hasn't it? And it's an easterly this time. So people, again, as a wide warning, just be aware that the cold weather and the wet weather is still around, so be prepared, I think.
That is Dave Hale from the Sheppey Horticultural Society right here at the Monday Night Community Show this evening.